Hello everyone, it's Scott, and we're back with the top 20 rare reprints from Magic the Gathering Foundation. So we got a tremendous amount of reprints in this set, and 10 was just not enough to talk about the quality rares from this set. So we're going to do our top 20 here. But before we do dive into that list, remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell notification button to get further content like this throughout Foundation, spoiler season, and beyond. So let's dive into our list. So coming in at number 20, I've got the Lords from this set. So we've got Wiltleaf Liege, which is a Lord for green and white creatures. They get +1/+1. We've got Death Baron, which is a Lord for skeletons and zombies. They get +1/+1 in Death Touch. We got Regal Caracal. Other cats get +1/+1 and have lifelink. We've got Adaptive Automaton. Okay, this creature you choose a type, and then creatures of that type get +1/+1. We've got Corsair Captain. Other pirates get +1/+1. We've got Elvish Archdruid, where other elves get +1/+1. And we've got Giada, Font of Hope. Other angels get a +1/+1 counter when they come into play for each angel you have in play. So we've got a lot of really solid lords coming out of the Foundation set, which I think is going to help allow some of these types to be more powerful in Standard. Coming in at number 19 is Authority of the Councils. For a white mana, you get an enchantment, and creatures your opponent controls enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever creature an opponent controls enters, you gain a life. So really powerful card here for 1 mana. It slows down all the haste creatures that we've got currently in the format. But more importantly, as your opponent plays creatures, they actually gain you life. And we do have cards from this set and already in Standard where life gain matters. And I think Authority of the Councils is just going to be another solid card to go in life gain decks. Coming in at number 18 is Storm Kirk Noble. For a red mana, you get a 1/1 Vampire Noble. This creature can't be blocked by humans. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you play this on turn 1, you attack with it, hopefully there's no blockers. It's now a 2/2. Okay, if you get a second attack in, it's a 3/3, and it just kind of grows throughout the game and becomes more and more difficult for your opponent to block. And with all the combat tricks we currently have in Standard, I think we can keep this alive. So I think there's a good chance this is going to see a decent amount of Standard play, particularly if we have a vampire deck that forms in Standard. Next, we've got Mentor of the Meek. For 2 and a white mana, you get a human soldier. That's a 2/2. And whenever another creature you control with power 2 or less enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 mana. If you do, you get to draw a card. So Mentor of the Meek is a card draw engine for small creature decks, and the human deck tends to be that way, where we're playing a lot of small creatures, so you can activate this regularly throughout the course of the game, giving yourself some card advantage. Next, we've got Hana and Elena, partners. For 2, a red and a green mana. You legendary creature that's a human ranger and is a 2/3 with first strike and reach, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control, where X is Hana and Elena's power. This creature gains haste until end of turn. So Hana and Elena was a card that saw some decent play when it was legal in Standard. So I would think that decks that are playing Gruul Stompy are going to want this again. And it was just a really powerful card, because if you couldn't deal with it right away, it was going to grow your team. And as a result of that, it really became a situation where within a couple of turns, particularly if you had ways of increasing Hana and Elena's power, then the team just kept growing to the point where they were going to snowball into a victory. Next, we've got Ball Lightning. For 3 red mana, you get an elemental. That's a 6/1 with trample and haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature. So Ball Lightning, 3 mana, do 6 damage to your opponent in theory. And it's been a solid Magic card for a long time. Good to see it back in Standard. Next, we've got Cronco Mob Boss for 2 and 2 red mana. You get a Goblin Warrior. That's a legendary creature and is a 3/3. And you can tap Cronco and create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. So what Cronco does is create a, in essence, goblin army over the course of a couple turns. And we've got multiple lords currently in Standard. So I think we're likely to see Cronco be a core part of a goblins deck in Standard. Next, we've got Scavenging Ooze at number 13 for 1 and a green mana. You get an Ooze, that's a 2/2, and you can pay a green mana and exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and you gain 1 life. So Scavenging Ooze has been in Standard a couple times. Every single time it's been a core part of green decks, because the really nice thing about this is if you just have green mana around at the end of your turn, you can activate this in essence wipe out your opponent's graveyard, and it really does a great job of countering any graveyard strategies. Coming in at number 12, we've got Galta, Primal Hunger for 10 and 2 green mana. You get a legendary creature, that's an Elder or Dinosaur, and is a 12/12 with Trample. And this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. So the nice thing about Galta is you can get Galta down to as little as 2 mana within a couple of turns. And because of that, I think Galta is going to become the top end of a number of strategies in Standard. So any green deck is going to want this, in my opinion, if they're playing a lot of creatures, because it won't be difficult to get Galta down to a relatively low cost. And if you have a way to give Galta trample, trampling in with a 12/12 is just devastating to your opponent. Coming in at number 11, I've got Primal Might for X and a green mana. You get a sorcery. Target creature you control gets X plus X until end of turn. Then it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So Primal Might, when it was in Standard, was a very powerful spell because it allowed you to take out probably the best creature on your opponent's side when you did this. And it then left a creature on the board on your side that you could then use to attack with. And if that creature has trample, it's going to trample through for a pretty significant amount of damage. Coming in at number 10, I've got Harmless Offering for 2 and a red mana. You get a sorcery. Target opponent gains control of target permanent you control. So yesterday I talked about Demonic Pact, where the final ability on that was you lose the turn. So using Demonic Pact with Harmless Offering was the way to, in essence, get Demonic Pact down to that you lose the game point, or an Archfiend of the Dross to that point, and then you use Harmless Offering to give it to your opponent, and they simply lose the game at that point. So I think we'll see that deck again, particularly because it's not just Demonic Pact now. We also have Archfiend of the Dross that does the same thing. Next, we've got Maelstrom Pulse for 1, a black, and a green mana. You get a sorcery, and you get to destroy a target non-land permanent and all other permanents with the same name as that permanent. So really powerful sorcery here, where you may be just taking out one thing with this, but if they've got multiple copies of that same card on the battlefield at that point, you get to take out all of them. So coming in at number 8, I've got Dictative Crew Fix for 1 and 2 blue mana. You get an enchantment with Flash, and at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. We've seen spells like this before see play in Standard. Howling Mind is kind of the first card that does this. But I think Dictative Crew Fix, because we've got cards already in Standard that care about your opponent drawing cards, and when they draw cards, they lose life, I think Dictative Crew Fix could be just the card to go with those to really enable those abilities to really punish your opponent when they're drawing cards in Standard. Coming in at number 7, I've got Rampaging Baloths for 4 and 2 green mana. You get a beast, that's a 6/6 with trample, and it also has landfall, and whenever a land you control enters the battlefield, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. So every turn you play a land, you get a 4/4. Pretty powerful card. If your opponent can't deal with it, it's probably going to trample through for damage because it's a 6/6, but then also every turn you can play a land, you're likely to then go ahead and create that 4/4. We already have a deck in Standard that kind of does this with Nissa and Aftermath Analyst, and those cards, along with Rampaging Baloths, I think are pretty powerful in Standard, and it'll be interesting to see if that deck can really pop off. Alright, coming in at number 6, we've got Basus Collar for 1 mana. You get an artifact, that's an equipment, and equipped creature gets Death Touch and Lifelink. And equip cost is 2. So this is a really powerful card that has only been in Commander to this point, and getting any card having for, in essence 3 mana, giving it Death Touch and Lifelink is really powerful. And one of the decks that I could see this actually finding its way into is actually Mono Red, because one of the problems that Mono Red has at times is they can't keep up with the life gain of an opponent. And giving a card Death Touch, giving a card Lifelink, one of your creatures, say a Slickshot Show Off, where it's a, sometimes it gets up to as high as a 15-3 or something like that. I can see, Basus Collar being really powerful in that kind of deck. So Basus Collar is my choice for number 6. Next, we've got Dread Summons for X and 2 black mana. You get a sorcery. Each player mills X cards. For each creature card put into a graveyard this way, you create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So it doesn't seem like a lot on the surface, but if you've got this in the late game and you've got 7-8 mana at that point, you mill 6 cards and you could get a half dozen or more 2/2 zombies. And we've already talked about Death Baron, which would make them all 3/3s. So I think this is actually a really powerful card. So don't sleep on it, because the zombie decks are going to really want to use this in the late game to really build up a board state that's going to be difficult for players to deal with. Next, at number 4, we've got Mazemindtone for 2 mana. You get an artifact, and you can tap it and put a page counter on this artifact and scry 1, or you can pay 2 and put a page counter on this artifact and draw a card. And when there are 4 or more page counters on this artifact, exile it. If you do, you gain 4 life. So Mazemindtone, when it was in Standard, was a very powerful card. It worked in mid-range decks, it worked in control decks, and because of that, it was in a wide variety of decks because of the card draw ability. 2 mana to draw a card, very reasonable on an artifact like this. And then the added bonus of after you get to that 4th draw, you get 4 life as well, which can be really important to those decks in the mid to late game, where gaining that 4 life could be the difference between winning and losing the game. So expect to see Mazemindtone back in decks almost immediately. At number 3, I've got Rite of Replication for 2 and 2 blue mana. You get a sorcery with Kicker 5. And create a token that's a copy of target creature. If this spell was kicked, create 5 of those tokens instead. So early in the game, you may play this and get a copy of an important creature on the battlefield, whether it's on your side or your opponent's side. And then late in the game, when you can pay the 9 mana, then you get 5 copies. So this can be an incredibly powerful spell in Standard, because if you're copying, a Archfiend of the Dross or something like that, I mean, it's going to become something that is basically game ending or game winning unless your opponent has a board wipe. So look for Rite of Replication to see a lot of Standard play. Next, at number 2, we got Harbinger of Tides for 2 blue mana, you get a Merfolk Wizard. That's a 2/2. And you may cast this card as though it had flash if you pay 2 more to cast it. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hands. So on the surface, Harbinger of Tide doesn't look all that powerful. But what Harbinger of Tide does is it's a tempo changer for you. Basically, your opponent goes to attack, you flash in Harbinger of the Tides, you return their best creature to their hand, and at that point, you've got a blocker for something smaller that your opponent is attacking with, but more importantly, you've really have gained a big tempo advantage by forcing your opponent to have to recast that card, and it may be they don't have the ability to do it this turn, and they may have to wait a turn or two to do that. And because of that, Harbinger of Tides is a very powerful Magic card. And we are seeing enough Merfolk currently in Standard that we even might see a Merfolk deck that is going to be able to play this. So I'm excited for this card to be back in Standard. And our number 1 card is Charming Prince. For 1 and a white mana, you get a Human Noble. That's a 2/2. And when this creature enters the battlefield, you get to choose 1, scry 2, you gain 3 life, or exile another target creature you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So Charming Prince, when it was in Standard, it was from Throne of Eldraine, and it was a very important Standard card in white. First, it can gain you life if you're playing an aggressive deck, and there was the very aggressive red deck at that point. So Charming Prince was a card that came in and it helped stabilize white players. But more importantly, if you have things that you want to flicker, Charming Prince is a great card because you can flicker something, it comes back in, and now it's going to be able to get that enter the battlefield ability one more time, and that can be a huge difference in Standard. And we've got a lot of cards currently in Standard, particularly the Overlords from Duskmourn, that when you come in, they do something for you. And the white one creates 2/1 flying creatures, and I can see Charming Prince and that Overlord being a really nice pairing together that really has an impact on Standard. Alright, so those are my top 20 rare reprints from the set. I'll be back later with a uncommon and common video for what I think are the best uncommons and commons that are reprints from the set. But let me know what you thought was your favorite rare returning in Foundations. And I put here links to my Mythic Rare videos for new cards and also reprints from the set. So thanks for staying to the end of the video. And remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this throughout Foundation season and beyond. And leave us a comment. We're trying to grow the channel, and that would be a big help for us. Thanks. I'll see you next time.